Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. So this evening we're going to reflect on wisdom and the power of wisdom. And when we look at the definition, you might say, offered in the suttas, in that little discourse called In Detail. And what is the power of wisdom? Here, a noble disciple is wise. They possess the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. This is called the power of wisdom. So, possessing this wisdom, that wisdom is defined in this way, that you know the arising and passing away, all things that come into existence cease. And that this is an insight. And we reflect on it frequently to prepare for the full effect of that insight to come. And it leads to the complete destruction of suffering, to awakening. And in the small sutta that I've been, it's actually the next one in the same area of the canon. It's in Anguttara Nikaya, the book of Fives, verses 13 to 16. And this is number 15. It talks about, or I should say suttas 13 to 16. And this one, when it talks about where is wisdom to be seen, the power of wisdom is to be seen in the Four Noble Truths. So you have that idea of arising and passing away, impermanence, and that the Four Noble Truths are what really demonstrate this wisdom. And then the next sutta is called the peak. And the Buddha said there are these 5 powers. What 5? The power of faith, the power of energy, the power of mindfulness, and the power of samadhi, and the power of wisdom. These are the 5 powers, and among these 5 powers, the power of wisdom is foremost. The one that holds all in place, the one that unifies them. Just as the peak is the chief part of a peaked roof house, the part that holds all in place, that unifies them, so it is among the 5 powers. The power of wisdom is foremost, the one that holds all in place, the one that unifies them. So I thought we'd take a look at the Four Noble Truths, the way the Buddha taught it, the way it has been passed down to us, at least, from the very first discourse he gave, the turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. And it's in the chanting book. You can turn to page 49. And of course, this is one translation. And the beginning part is, that the Buddha had come to the place where the 5 ascetics were that he had been practicing with before he became enlightened, and they were practicing these austere practices. And he came back to them to teach them about what he had discovered when he became enlightened. And I want to jump down to the second paragraph from the bottom and just talk about these noble truths. So it says, this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of dukkha. Birth is dukkha. This is the first noble truth, the noble truth of dukkha. Birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, death is dukkha. Grief or sorrow, lamentation, pain, sorrow and despair are dukkha. Association with the disliked is dukkha. Separation from the liked is dukkha. Not getting what one wants is dukkha. In brief, clinging to the 5 khandhas is dukkha. So this is the standard. You see this same text repeated through the suttas in many places. And I found that it was really valuable to reflect upon, to try to understand what did the Buddha mean by birth is dukkha, for example. And I could get that death is dukkha. I could get that aging or old age has a lot of dukkha involved. But we usually celebrate birth. And I had, by that time I had given birth twice, and I guess my children were already pretty grown up. College age, and a little after, I guess, or something like that. And, just thinking about why is birth considered to be dukkha? And just intuitively, I knew it wasn't about the pain of giving birth to them. That does hurt, but it took some time to understand enough about karma, enough about rebirth, to recognize what the Buddha was getting at there. And in the process of reflecting on all these things that are dukkha, I started to reflect on other things that are dukkha. Because certainly we can understand that these feelings of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Sometimes translators don't use grief anymore because grief has so many components to it that, have to do with kind of rewiring your brain after you lose someone close to you. Which I guess is also dukkha in a way. Certainly not being able to be with what we love or like, and having to deal with what we don't like. I think probably is obvious dukkha. And basically things just aren't the way we want them to be. And it's dukkha. But I spent some time really reflecting on the different things that are happening in life and the dukkha that comes with them. Excuse me. And I would recommend that reflection. It's not about seeing how bad things are, going kind of depressive or down. It's really an opportunity to understand why we suffer. And, as I've been talking about quite a bit, turning to face it, which the Buddha is going to talk about here in a little bit. Then the second noble truth. This is the noble truth of the cause of dukkha, the craving which causes rebirth, and is bound up with pleasure and lust, ever seeking fresh delight, now here, now there, namely, craving for sense pleasure, craving for existence, and craving for annihilation. Or what the Pali is kama tanha, which is craving for sensual experience. Bhava tanha, which is craving to become or to gain something. And vibhava tanha, which is craving to get rid of or get away from something or end something. So it's interesting when you look at when you're feeling dukkha, when you're suffering, to look at which cause it is and kind of understand. And this is what we want, and this is what we don't want. And as we reflect upon it, we can recognize how this is natural. Natural to want sensual pleasure, natural to want to have good feelings, to be with what we love, what we like. Natural to want to get away from what we don't like. And how the impermanent nature of things brings about this suffering. The shorthand version of this is attachment. On page 51. This is the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha. The complete cessation, giving up, abandonment of that craving, complete release from that craving, and complete detachment from it. This is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. Only this noble eightfold path, namely right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right samadhi. You're having trouble hearing me? Okay, thank you. Okay, is that better? All right, good. So the part I wanted to really draw your attention to is the next paragraphs, because when the Buddha talked about the noble truths, he described a task for each one of them. And here he says, with the thought, this is the noble truth of dukkha, there arose in me vision, knowledge, insight, wisdom, light, concerning things unknown before. With the thought, this is the noble truth of dukkha, and this dukkha has to be understood. There arose in me this vision, knowledge, insight, wisdom, light, concerning things unknown before. With the thought, this is the noble truth of dukkha, and this dukkha has been understood. There arose in me vision, knowledge, insight, wisdom, light, concerning things unknown before. So here, with the noble truth of dukkha, the task is for us to understand it. And when we understand it, we recognize that we understand it. It's been understood. And this is what I've been talking about around locating the feeling in the body when we're suffering and coming to really be present with it, face it, and let it work its way through, observe it. Now, how does this help us understand it? Well, one thing we understand about it is its impermanence. And we can understand that it changes in a way that we can become completely free of it, even when the conditions haven't changed. And you have to do this in order to recognize how it works. And part of that investigation also shows us the cause of the dukkha. So the next part, this is the noble truth of the cause of dukkha. With this thought, there arose in me the vision, knowledge, insight, wisdom, and light concerning things unknown before. With the thought, this is the noble truth of the cause of dukkha, and this cause of dukkha has to be abandoned. There arose in me vision, knowledge, insight, wisdom, light concerning things unknown before. And with the thought, this is the noble truth of the cause of dukkha. This cause of dukkha has been abandoned. There arose in me vision, knowledge, insight, wisdom, light concerning things unknown before. So when we're turning towards this feeling, so often it's not really about what triggered it. You know, we might feel that dukkha just based on what someone says. But how can words alone be that much cause of suffering? You know, there's a teaching of the Buddha where he talks about how we can look at speech as having 5 qualities. This comes from a sutta called the Simile of the Saw. And he said, you know, what anyone says to you is either true or false. That's one quality. It's either spoken to you with a good purpose or a harmful purpose. You know, it's either got a good purpose behind it or it doesn't. It's either spoken with a mind of loving kindness or a mind of inner hate. It's spoken to you gently or harshly, or it's spoken at the right time or not. How many of you have heard of this before? So he said, these are the only qualities, the characteristics of speech. So when someone says something to us, we can evaluate these characteristics And when we recognize that that's just all there is to it. You know, if it's false, okay. If it's coming from a bad intention, okay. If it's, these other things, it's like we don't really have to take it in. And he says if you really think about it, if it's something that's true, then you can look at it, and if it's a criticism or something and it's true, then use it to support your practice, to help you learn. And you don't really, he's like, you don't really have to react to this, any of it. You can just decide, I'm just going to have a mind of loving kindness. And, starting with this person, I'm going to spread this loving kindness. And I'm not going to utter any bad words. I'm just going to maintain this even-mindedness of loving kindness. But a lot of times, we get really affected by what people say. And it's oftentimes has nothing to do with the current situation, right? It's triggering something old. And this is why it's so important when we're feeling bad about things to really take the time to investigate it, so that we can free ourselves from this, because usually these things just repeat over and over again. And then we start to understand why. Why does this bother me? It's also helpful sometimes to notice that we hear something and it really bothers us, but someone else might hear it and it might not have that effect on them at all. And just to get that sense of, okay, there's this sensitivity in me. Where does it come from? And in this process of being present with this feeling and investigating, what's the root? I think we need to get more specific or open ourselves up to the insight arising around what's really underneath it. We might be able to think, oh yeah, this is related to my wanting some kind of sensual experience through, something through the senses that I'm not getting, or that I feel like this kind of attacks my character, or, some feeling of it not aligning with who I think I am, or a wholly unpleasant, something we want to stay away from. We can look at it like that. But to really investigate and then recognize that, what is it really worth to be upset by this? So it's not so much the reasoning of it, but the feeling of it. And when the Buddha talks about the cessation of dukkha, I don't know if you've had this experience of being present with what you're feeling in the body to the point where the feeling really ceases. where you really feel like you've gone all the way through. But I really want to encourage you to develop the stamina to do that. Because there is a relief or a release that happens. And the Buddha said, when the cessation of dukkha, how it ends, that it needs to be realized. The cessation of dukkha has to be realized. That's the task there. And with the thought, this is the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha, and the cessation of dukkha has been realized. Again, there arose this knowledge, this vision, this insight and wisdom and light concerning things unknown before. And the final one is the path. The path leading to the cessation of dukkha. The Noble Eightfold Path. And that the task here is that the path, the way leading to the cessation of dukkha has to be developed. And when it's at some point you recognize that it's been developed, this noble truth, this path has been developed. And we can recognize the development along the way. How much has it changed in your time of practice? And the Buddha then says that so long as my knowledge and vision of reality regarding these Four Noble Truths in their 3 phases and 12 aspects, so there's 4 of them, they each have these 3 components. The truth, the noble truth, the task, and realizing the completion of that task. He said until he understood this, he did not declare his enlightenment. So it's like we can get the sense of how important this is. One of the things we were talking about today in one of the groups was how the Noble Eightfold Path and the rest of the things that the Buddha taught really are a whole lifestyle. You know, it really can help us shape our life in a way that really reduces the chaos, the confusion, and it does require this inner reflection to develop and discover the wisdom. So one of the places in our life where we have a lot of our experience with dukkha is with our close relationships. And as I was saying earlier, I spent quite a bit of time just as I was going through my ordinary life of going to work, going to school, going to ministry school at that time, just reflecting on things. I don't think I've told you this story, but you can stop me if I did. What, you wouldn't do that though, would you? Dang. Okay. Well, if you've heard it before, and some of you have, then just see if you can gain anything new from it. So I was reflecting on, like I said, things like, why is birth suffering? And I was really finding value in having a question in the back of my mind like this of anything I didn't understand from what I was reading in the suttas or what I was hearing in the Dhamma talks that I was listening to. And I started investigating other things that I could see dukkha in, and I was, thinking, so many of the things we spend our time on, just for fun, has so much dukkha in it. And this is just natural to this realm, this world. There's good and bad about everything. There's always parts, I don't know when you learned this, but my mom told me when I was pretty young, no matter what you're doing, there's going to be parts of it you won't like. You're never going to like all of it, There's going to be some kind of drawback somewhere. But a lot of things we do for enjoyment also, the challenging side. And I was living with someone who had a tropical fish tank, and he was always doing something with the fish tank, like clean it every week, and there was always some kind of thing happening with the fish, like a fish would get sick and he'd set up a hospital tank and put the fish in there so it would get better, and then two fish would be fighting and he would separate them in the tank, putting a divider, and one time he's like, oh, this one fish has gotten too big for the tank, I'm going to take it to the fish store and get a different one. And I thought, wow, there's just so much dukkha. And what's the benefit? Is it like really just because you like sitting there watching the fish? And I'm just thinking, not to blame him, but sometimes watching other people's behavior makes it so much easier to see what's going on, right? And it's always important to look back at ourselves and, okay, what am I doing that also has a lot of dukkha in it, and is it really worth my time, or is it really worth it? But anyhow, I was reflecting on this, and I had been going to the monastery, Bayagiri Buddhist monastery that we've mentioned a few times in Northern California, and I'd stay overnight, and come back a couple days later, and I was about to, I think I was about to leave for one of those trips, and he said to me, the fish tank is perfect right now. 4 fish, they're all beautiful, they're all getting along, they're all healthy, and it's just perfect. And in my heart I went, oh no. Because you know what's next. And sure enough, actually before I even left, one of the fish died, and just like floating in the next morning. And then I left, and by the time I got back, 2 more of the fish had died, and the 4th one was looking really bad. And I was washing dishes and just standing at the kitchen sink, thinking, man, fish tanks are suffering. And the next thought was, family is suffering. And it hit me, and it did something to my mind. And suddenly, the way I felt about my family and every other living being was the same, loving all of them the same. It was weird. I think about my daughter or my son and the snails on the sidewalk, same feeling. My daughter was about to go on a trip, and usually I'd be worried about her, and I wasn't worried. I loved her, wanted her to be happy. I loved the squirrels, I wanted them to be happy. And there was, this is kind of the power of insight. But the love was so much more full, boundless than what I would have for my son or my daughter. It's like the attachment broke. And I called my son the monk in Thailand. And he said, "That's great. I know this is progress, but I want my mother." And I learned it's not the best thing to tell your family members when this happens, even if they're monks. And ever since, there's been a feeling of equanimity around things for them. But I found I needed to kind of rebuild the way of interacting with them to show them that I love them in the way that they feel loved. Because even though the love is enormous, we want to feel special with the people in our life. And it's also the case that those relationships are special because they have a front row seat to their life and their life experiences. So being their mother, I have an opportunity to help them I don't have with other people. So even though the caring is different, the connection is stronger. Does that make sense? Does any of this make sense? I think when we really look into impermanence, dukkha, and not self, with that kind of commitment or dedication or I don't know, enthusiasm isn't quite the right word, but there's something relentless about the practice when it really catches hold of you. And the insights that arise just naturally cause the dukkha to cease. And I don't want to, the reality is that there is still some dukkha. I could feel if I'm starting to go down the track of attaching more, and it's possible to pull back from that. If I start worrying about my grandchildren, it's like, oh, okay.
I'm falling into that again, but I don't need to. I can pull back from that. And yet the kindness that comes up and the caring that comes up and the willingness to be there for them for whatever I can do to support them is also just so ready and available. So from that experience, I can say that you don't have to lose what you love or the connection or the opportunity to help. But you can lose the dukkha and the attachment. You can honor the fact that they have their own lives, whoever it is, in their own karma. And even we were talking today about losing the attachment to the body and recognizing that the body has its own karma. It's aging and it's going to die in its own timing. And it's not who you are. It's not who we are. And then, what happens with the mind? Well, I'm totally convinced based on insight that the mind continues on according to its karma until it's awakened, completely awakened. So we want to develop this Noble Eightfold Path, and we want to reflect on the Four Noble Truths and on the three characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self, in order to really break it down, understand it as much as possible intellectually, and open to what we've never known before. Like the Buddha, light, knowledge, it arises. You see things, you see it in a different way. And it makes it possible to let go. So family is suffering, and we love them. But that love without attachment is so far and away a greater gift to everyone, yourself and to them. So when we're worrying about them, we can use these first three noble truths to really understand that suffering. What do we want to be different? And what is actually the reality of this world? There's sickness, there's problems, and there's relief. So the wisdom that we gain is, there's a lot of wisdom on the sort of mundane level that we can develop. And then there's the wisdom that takes us beyond that. And I think from what I've seen is that this comes because of our commitment to practice. And I think it's also our commitment to let go. Let go of who we think we are. Let go of what we think we own. And following the Dhamma, living according to the Dhamma, developing the Noble Eightfold Path, it really does open the way for all blessings to come. It's like if that's the center of our life, everything else comes together around it. Doesn't mean there aren't challenges or, the natural way of karma still unfolding, but the resiliency, the sort of peace and cushion of the heart make it all just part of the path. So these 5 powers really work together. The faith, the energy, mindfulness has to be there. The samadhi provides this deep healing and cushioning around us, holding us. And wisdom, knowing and seeing. And they all come together to help us in the moment, and they come together to help us awaken. So as we practice, we want to be balanced around developing the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path and these components of the powers, or choose a list, the 7 factors of enlightenment. You just see a lot of the same things repeated, but however we go about it, it gives us the whole foundation for our life. As I've been listening to some of your stories, it's all so understandable and normal stuff that happens in human lives. Very much worthy of compassion, and I hope you have that compassion for yourselves. It's very much just noticing how we are affected through our attachment, and that we can let it go. That we're affected through our sense of self, and we can let it go. And when I say affected, I really mean that's why we're suffering. We suffer because of these ideas we have